So my name's Krishna. I've been living for the last 32 years in Solitude Farm in Auroville. I was a student in Jiddu Krishnamurti School where I had a very privileged education, and I was inspired by the teachings of Masanobu Fukuoka, who is like a jnani, wise man farmer from Japan, and that led me to come to Auroville and start Solitude Farm. So this talk is about food, and food is the lowest common denominator. It's the one thing that we all need, whether you're a beggar or a king. It's our essential value. And like if we really look at the actual situation that we are in on the planet today, we have a global crisis. It's on climate change with the flooding, the ice caps melting, the tsunamis, the forest fires. And you see that is definitely, created in big part by industrialized agriculture, because that is causing a lot of this, the pollution and the carbon footprint. But you also see the crisis on a nutritional level. Again, from industrialized agriculture, you have 11% of the population of India has diabetes. That's more than one person out of 10, which is extraordinary, because if you go back 50 years ago, you go in the villages, no one had diabetes, And you see that there's a fragmentation in the society because of this. You see there's an erosion of cultural knowledge. Today when I was being brought from the airport, I was talking about Arabi. Hindi mein is Arabi, no? And the young gentleman, he didn't know what Arabi was. So you see, because we eat potatoes, then there's an erosion of culture. And you see that, that goes on and on and on, to the extent that if you go to England, we have no culture left. Our culture is beer and football. Some remnants of some colonial past, but there's nothing essential that unites us as a people. You walk down the street, people are afraid to look you in the eye. You go to the village in Tamil Nadu, first thing they'll say is, Vanga, tea saapringa, betting, chai piyenge. There's a warmth and an openness. It's because you have culture still. So you see, wow, this is getting worse and worse and worse, and what's the solution? Well, it seems to me that the essence of that problem is that we've lost our relationship with where our food comes from. And where our food comes from implies local foods. So, local foods that grow around us. Plants and foods that are the very foundation of a culture. If you take the idea from the Upanishad, the concept of the Annamaya Kosh, which is the food sheath. That's the foundation of our existence. Then you have the Pranamaya Kosh, the life force sheath. You have the Manomaya Kosh, and you have then language which emerges from that, which is a vehicle of culture. Without a body, there would be no Sanskrit, there would be no Upanishad, So really understanding our relationship with our food, and specifically local foods, is really, what we need to start to reconsider. So when you look at local foods, you see things like the moringa. Maybe you're familiar with moringa. I forget the name in Hindi. Sahajan, what's that called in Hindi? Drumstick? Anyone know? Huh? Okay, this is it. So the moringa is considered a superfood. But do you know how to grow it? You break off a stick, you plug it in the ground, and it grows. It's like, wow, that's too easy. There's no expertise to grow the local food. You can see that it has very high medicinal and nutritional value. As I said, it's a superfood. But in fact, all these local foods have some medicinal value, some extremely beautiful nutritional quality, to the extent that you see Solitude Farm, it's not just a farm, it's a pharmacy. This is the bale fruit, so we make the sherbet from that. Many people will say, bale fruit sherbet, I know that. When did you last have it? That's the question, It's there as a cultural memory, but the reality of really having it regularly means you still have to have a relationship with the land, or possibly a grandma who will feed you that. And you see other characteristics of local food are no carbon footprint. Now in Tamil Nadu, where some of the speakers are from and are staying, we don't grow potatoes. They don't grow there, but every single person in every household has potato, carrot, beetroot, cabbage, cauliflower. And you ask yourself, well, if none of those foods grow in Tamil Nadu, that means they have no relationship to this Annamaya Kosh. And then you go, well, how did they get to our plate? Well, you have to build a lorry to bring them. So you consider what that means. That means factories for the metal, factories for the engine, the glass, the plastic, the paint, then the petroleum, the pipelines, the oil rig, the refinery, the tanker, even the nuclear power station. All of that is polluting planet, and then we'll talk about organic farming. There is no logic to it, The local foods have no carbon footprint. And also there's a great diversity in local foods. If you take again something like the moringa, we eat the leaf, we eat the flower, we eat the pod, we use the seeds. There's even a resin that comes from the bark, it's extraordinary. Not to mention the leaves, So you start to see, hang on, the redemption that we have actually lies in a culture that's already there. It's not something that needs to be learned from outside. And you start to see that these really beautiful, plants that are growing in our farm. We have over 200 edible plants. And as I say, from each plant there are different parts of it that can be used. The problem is with all of this is no one will buy them. Maybe you've heard of banana stem. So the banana stem, if you go to a market, if you listen to this talk, you go, Krishna, that's a really good talk. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start selling banana stem. You'll spend 50 rupees in petrol and you get 30 rupees for your banana stem. Which farmer is going to do it? It has no sense. So the only chance to really use these local foods is farm to plate. And farm to plate is what we've done at Solitude Farm. Is we've started an organic a farm to, I don't like the word organic actually, it's a con. Because when you were a child, the senior people here, everything was organic. Or if you ask their mothers or your grandparents, they'll say everything was organic. It's a marketing thing, organic. But, back in the day, as everything was organic, that's not really the word to use. Local food is the word to use. So the local foods are not valued anymore. It's the industrialized food, and increasingly overly highly processed foods. If you go to England in the 80s, I think 60% of foods that the consumer would buy, it was vegetables from the supermarket or the grocery store. Now it's, and 20% was processed food. Now it's the opposite. 20% is fresh vegetables and 60% is processed food. And of course there's cancer. Of course there's diabetes. Of course there's, high blood pressure and BP and all of these problems. So what this requires is the farm to plate. And that means feeding people directly the food that is growing around you. And in Solitude, what we've done is we've recognized that this very anthropocentric way of growing food, I'll grow one crop and I'll get the money from it, and this, it's extracting the economic value of the food and recognizing for its fundamental value, which is nutritional. And to do that, we made a food forest. I mean, it's arrogant to say we made a food forest. Bhumidev made the food forest. Bhumidev is the soil. In Europe, they call it Gaia. In South America, they call it Pachimama. I think in Ghana, they call it Anasaya. So every culture has a name for this divinity. And if you leave her alone, the inherent intelligence of nature manifests, and you see, hang on, that's where culture has emerged from. So that's sort of what's happened at Solitude Farm over the years. And such diversity of produce that we have, that you can say in many cases is forgotten food, that we start using in our cafe. And the cafe is a big success. People come from all around to have food in our cafe. We pay good amount of GST and pension funds and wages, and it's a success economically, it's educationally, it's success, and nutritionally it's a success, and it creates community. So it's really amazing. And again, you might say, oh, Krishna, nice story, very good job, well done, But how do we upscale this? How do we bring this to our society? So we have different projects that we've sort of explored with the aim to make this a mainstream idea, which shouldn't be so difficult because the knowledge is in the culture, except everyone wants Maggi noodles and Lay's crisp and, and burgers and stuff. But if we come back to that, you start to see that if you could bring this knowledge to corporate spaces, for example, that's one space that we've been working with. Actually, I think the slide is a bit further along, but you'll remember it when you see it. It's re-landscaping ornamental landscapes and changing them to edible landscapes. That means when you're coming up your path here, you start to see the drumstick spinach and the green papaya, and you see bananas, and you think, well, why aren't there mangoes and guavas and chicos growing everywhere in the campus? Why isn't a campus, whether it's Infosys or whether it's a college, why isn't it full of food? And why isn't that food given in the canteens? So this is farm to plate, and that's a typical plate in Solitude. There's green papaya salad, there's red rice, there's dosa with edible weeds that are good for your elbows and your knees, what we call moratakan in Tamil, balloon vine, and of course plenty of fruits, and it changes throughout the season. So we worked with one corporate in Chennai where we created them, they wanted a farm and a cafe, a farm to plate, and we said, you have a canteen, use that to start with, that's fine. We'll start you the farm. So within 3 months, we had 700 kilos of produce, and their staff were eating, their own cucumbers and tomatoes and brinjals and pumpkins, and there was a very significant, reflection of that beauty for the people. I think you could feel a sense that the community of those workers was uplifted because of that. Another project that we've been trying to work on is working with a major airline. So you book your flight and you have the option of local food. I went on a very, actually someone was talking about my music. I was going for recording my 4th album in Hyderabad. It was a very beautiful flight, and they served me wholemeal bread and cheddar cheese. And I was like, what's that got to do with India? And then I sort of thought, well, if you booked your flight and you had a local food, and there was a ragi roti with, what we call gongura in Andhra Pradesh, that rosella chutney and a bit of this, and people be on the flight going, hey, this is our food, and the food has no carbon footprint, or at least a minimal carbon footprint, and on top of that, it supports local farmers, and it supports them to not have to buy into the whole industrialization of food. So that means things like using the turkey berry. Turkey berry here will help against diabetes. It will reverse type 2 diabetes, but it grows like an edible weed. So if you can support that, actually there's a renaissance of well-being simply by honoring culture that's already there, that's being forgotten though. So that's a project that's in the pipeline. And I would say this is actually the slide about re-landscaping corporate spaces. So you walk to your, go into your C++ or whatever it is you're doing, and you see, oh, there's a hibiscus. Oh, I'm going to have that in my juice today. In the college, you come, you're in the college, Ambani College, and at tea time there's hibiscus juice, and it's good for heart, it's good for blood pressure, etc., etc. But it's also growing with papayas. And on Wednesdays we have the Thai salad with green papaya, and it's very tasty, and they have a sesame and a peanut, and then you see underneath there's a ground cover of tipuli. Tipuli is the long black pepper, pippalongum they call it in Latin, and that's very good for the digestive fire, for respiratory diseases. We put it in soups, we put it in different dishes. So that's aesthetically pleasing, and yet it's honoring the culture. So this is the sort of work that we're trying to do as well. This is actually a picture of that corporate space, and where we changed it from 3 months to look like above, and then after 3 months look below, like it is below. I would say though, the most inspiring way we could effect a profound change in a society, and I maintain that this is the most important thing in the world today. Because all you have to do is ask yourself, where did my food come from? And you look at it, no idea. So if we have no idea where our food comes from, that means we have no relationship with Annamaya Kosh. And we will end up like England or America, countries without culture. That can't happen to India. The roots of the culture are too deep. But it does mean that we have to come back to honoring these foods. And as I say, probably the most inspiring and profound way we can effect this change is through introducing these foods to the government midday meal scheme. So Solitude is 5 acres, and we produce about 8 to 10 tons of food per year. As I say, many of those foods can't be sold, but I can feed you it, and you'll go, wow, that's so nice. And I'll say, yeah, it's a bunch of weeds that just grow without effort, you know. So you start to see that, well, if we had, say, 20 of these farms in a 20-kilometer radius, and they all brought the food to a cooking center and distributed that for the midday meal scheme, wow, there could be a massive change. The takeaways are obviously health. In 1 generation, lifestyle disease is gone. Obviously, there will be a statistic in climate change. Maybe we won't reverse climate change, but eventually there will be a statistic. I would say the most important thing, though, is the cultural redemption. You see, we grow up and we start to have different opinions in politics, in religion, in music, in literature, and people are fighting for that. You know, he's a vegan. You know, he's like, vegan, how dare you eat meat? You know, there'll be a fight about it. Or you like Krishnamurti. Well, I like Sai Baba. Krishnamurti was a fool. There'll be a fight. People will fight for opinions, beliefs, ideologies. And yet, you put that drumstick spinach between us and we'll both people go, oh, this is very nice, you know. So you start to see that this local food is the lowest common denominator in any society. Like the custard apple. Grows like a weed, super tasty, but people are buying apples from America. That's where apples come from nowadays in India. So, you start to see that this is the way forward, but there's so much resistance to do that, you know. And you think, how can you do this? Well, I met the environment minister in Chennai a couple of years back, and we were talking about it, and she also saw how complicated it is. And we recognized that what we have to do is just start with one thing. So the idea we have at the moment that we're trying to bring forward is drumstick spinach in every college in Tamil Nadu. So we start with, say, 10 colleges, and the students come to the farm once a month, and they learn about growing it, they learn about the cooking it, they understand the value, the whole narrative, and they go back to their college, and once a month we'll also go to their college, and they plant that in all different public spaces within the college. They also harvest, and maybe they're also involved in the documentation. And I believe that this would lead them forward. This would lead them maybe next to the green papaya, which can be had as a soup, as a vegetable dish, as a halwa. And you start to see that it's by eating the education lies, you know. It's not by reading about it or watching YouTube or even hearing talks. The education is sensual. It's in the palate. It's when you go, wow, I like to eat that, you know. That's beautiful, and it will just grow around me. So we're trying to bring back that relationship with Annamaya Ghosh, with our culture. And I believe that it can happen. I always maintain that in India, I have a lot of friends, abroad also. Before I came to India, they're all in IIT or MIT or Harvard. They're very, very smart, you know. This isn't about being smart. This is just logistics. This is just logistics of valuing thing that's already there. How do we bring it together, and how can we make that happen? And within that lies a cultural redemption. Within that lies a bhakti, a devotion to Bhumi Dev, and a renaissance of well-being. Thank you very much.